Okay, everybody, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Chris Gutierrez, and thank you for joining us. We are hosting Chelsea Helena from the Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles, and she's going to share with us about special ed advocacy while we're going through COVID-19. And during the meeting, you can type into the chat if you have a question, and we'll do our best to answer the questions. I will let Chelsea over and start her slideshow for you, her PowerPoint. And I think that's it. Vicki, do you have anything to add?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so put it on our YouTube page later. What you type in the chat box will not be part of the recording, just what you see on the screen. If you are more comfortable typing in questions in the screen, you can do that. And I stop the recording at the end of Chelsea's presentation so that you can ask questions at that point. Is that right, Chelsea?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Chelsea Helena. I am the education attorney at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. And my education practice is entirely in Antelope Valley. So I serve exclusively students and families who attend public schools in the Antelope Valley. Tonight, I am looking forward to providing you with information and advocacy tips that you can use for virtual IEPs. It looks like distance learning may be a possibility even for next year. So even though this school year is coming to a close, you can keep these tips in mind for next year as well. I apologize if during this presentation you hear some shouting behind. My husband is a teacher and he's doing a trivia night this evening and he's very animated. So I apologize if that makes that into the recording. If you have any questions for me, like Vicki and Chris said, you can just stick them in the chat box, but if they're more specific or you'd rather not share them with the group, my email is on this first slide, chelseahelena@nlsla.org. If I don't have time to get to your questions tonight, I'll make sure to write up responses to them and then give them to Chris and Vicki, and they can ensure that they get to you. So we'll get started. We have, make sure this is going to work. There we go. We have quite a bit of information to get through this evening. This is our agenda. We're going to be starting with an overview of the guidance that's been provided by the federal and state departments of education on distance learning and special education while schools are closed. So in March of 2020, Congress passed the CARES Act, which stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. This, among other things, provided those stimulus payments that some of us were able to access. And it also included a requirement that our Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, report back by the end of April on whether she needed to request any congressional approval to provide districts with waivers to the IDEA during the pandemic. And the IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's the federal law that governs all of special education and how that's provided in schools. So on April 24th, Secretary DeVos submitted that report to Congress. And while she did request a few waivers under the IDEA, none of them related to the core tenets of the Act or how services should be delivered to K-12 students during closures. So this is good news. It means that during COVID-19, children with disabilities still have a right to receive a free appropriate public education or a FAPE that is outlined in EP with the children or with the child learning in the least restrictive environment. So school districts and oversight agencies still have to ensure that to the greatest extent possible, each student with a disability is provided with the services that are identified in their IEP or their Section 504 plan during school closure. Secretary DeVos did, however, allow states to waive the requirement that students take state standardized tests. You may have noticed that at the end of this year, students aren't ramping up to take the CASP because California took advantage of this waiver. And that means that state tests like the CASP were canceled, and states do not have to report these test scores to federal accountability agencies or publish these reports on school accountability report cards. The biggest thing I want you to take away from federal guidance is that while school districts are still required to provide a FAPE, the federal government gave school systems flexibility. And that flexibility can be used to determine how that FAPE provision should be done. This means that school districts have flexibility on how to deliver services, schedule IEPs, and develop distance learning plans. And California has taken advantage of this flexibility. In March of 2020, some of you may remember that Governor Newsom signed into law SB 117. And SB 117 limits some special education rights for California students. It was able to do this because typically California provides more protections to special education students than the federal government requires. So SB 117 took away some of those extra protections during COVID-related closures, and so students' rights would revert back to the rights that they have under federal law. The three timelines that I listed on the screen are the ones that are impacted. And those would be the right to receive records within 5 business days of a request, the right to receive a written response to an assessment request within 15 calendar days, and the right to receive results of a state-level compliance complaint within 60 days. So what SB 117 essentially does is that it allows the State Department of Education to consider the days that a school is physically closed due to COVID-19 as days between a student's regular school session. So those days wouldn't be calculated as part of timelines and governing state special education provision. So it's important to note, though, that SB 117 didn't waive any federal requirements included under the IDEA. For example, a family can still request and obtain records under an IEP by claiming the right that you have under federal law. So under federal law, records must be provided within 45 days or before an IEP. All right, so now that we have some background on the guidance that the state and federal government has provided, we can start to talk about learning and IEPs. So on this slide, I included 3 somewhat common questions that I've been getting from parents and families during COVID closures. So the first question is there a need to hold an IEP meeting to discuss its implementation during closures? The answer to this question is if a district is able to provide all of a student's IEP services during a physical school closure, there's no need to convene an IEP team to discuss any changes to the IEP or get further consent to provide services that you already agreed to. But if a district can't provide all of a child's IEP services during closures, the IEP team should meet to create a distance learning plan. Some of your districts may have provided you with prior written notice outlining which services it would or would not be implementing during closures. You should know that if the district is attempting to limit services in any way, you have the right to discuss those changes in an IEP meeting. The next question is, what would a distance learning plan IEP look like? A distance learning plan IEP, like all IEPs, must allow for meaningful parental participation and should allow the district and parent an opportunity to reach an agreement on what services will be provided and how they will be provided. As always, an IEP cannot be changed without parental consent. A distance learning plan can look like an amendment to an IEP, or it can be a separate document that would be temporarily implemented during school closures. But as with typical IEPs, distance learning IEPs should include the child's teachers and service providers who can all join using remote or virtual technology like teleconferencing or video conferencing. All right, third question. What options do schools have when it comes to distance learning instruction? When it comes to distance learning instruction, districts have that flexibility we discussed earlier to determine what distance learning can look like. They still do have the obligation under federal law to provide an appropriate plan for a student, though. Distance learning options that districts have can include online instruction, virtual instruction where you would meet with your teacher over a computer screen, instructional telephone calls, or some other curriculum-based activities like paper packets, or maybe Google Classroom. Regardless of the option that the district selects, though, federal and state discrimination law require that any material that is provided must be accessible to students with disabilities. So that means that you can request modifications and accommodations during distance learning that maybe could include extended time for assignments or modified shortened assignments or assignments provided in a more accessible format. So despite this, district still needs to make sure that you have an understanding of how instruction and services will be provided. You should have an understanding of which services can be provided at another location, which services can be provided online or virtually, which services can be provided in your home, or which can be provided through telehealth or video conferencing. A lot of schools are taking advantage of consultation services, which provide an opportunity for parents and service providers to meet over the phone or over remote technology to support a parent's implementation of services at home, or to address questions or issues that come up while while working through assignments. But service decisions, and this is important, need to be made on an individual basis with an attention to the student's needs. So blanket bans across a district of certain types of service provision may or may not be appropriate if it turns out that a student really needs a particular service delivered in a particular way. When it comes to the amount of distance learning that schools must provide, there really isn't a clear answer to this question, as the situation that we're in is pretty unprecedented. The number of hours that a child needs to access their education and avoid aggression is an individual calculation. Some services and assignments may and likely will need to be adjusted to account for new issues that come up while the student is working from home. If a district claims to not have personnel to provide a particular service or therapy in an IEP at all, you can request that that service be provided by something called a non-public agency or an NPA. Non-public agencies are outside providers that districts can contract with and pay to provide services that their education has a searchable of NPAs by county and school district, and I included the link on this slide so that you can access it if you need to. And I believe that I'm going to be giving these slides to Chris and Vicki after, so you can access it then as well. All right, our next topic looks at how assessments and timelines are affected by COVID closures. There has been a lot of confusion among parents that I've spoken to about what timelines a school must follow when it comes to meetings and assessments. First, annual and triennial IEPs, those are those IEPs that are held every year and every 3 years respectively. Those are governed by federal timelines, which, as we've already discussed, have not been waived. So this means that districts are still required to hold on time. If you have an IEP that was postponed or canceled due to closures, it must be rescheduled as soon as possible. Timelines associated with assessments, though, it's a more complicated issue. Guidelines from the federal office for, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, published on March 6th, slide, on March 16th state that if an evaluation of a student with a disability requires a face-to-face assessment or observation, the evaluation would need to be delayed until schools reopen. Evaluations and reevaluations that do not require face-to-face assessments or observations can still take place as long as parents consent. So if a student has a triennial IEP scheduled during school closures, parents, you can still agree to hold the meeting if you agree to have the student reevaluated through what's called a review of existing evaluation data. So the school would be looking at the data that it already has on your student prior to schools closing. So if that is an option for you, if you would prefer to move forward with a triennial without new assessments. When it comes to assessments, it's important to know that any assessment that's completed has to be two things. It has to be valid and it has to be reliable. Validity essentially means that the test measures what it's supposed to measure, and reliability means that the test is going to bring about consistent results. So when it comes to assessments that are given virtually during closures, you have to have an assessor that knows how to administer an assessment in a virtual setting. Because if they don't, both the assessment's validity and reliability could be compromised. An assessor must be able to create circumstances virtually that will yield valid and reliable results. So some assessments, like those that might require an assessor to ask a child questions and have the child respond, can't verbally, those can be done virtually through remote technology. But other assessments that require classroom observations for behavior, like an FBA, a functional assessment, or hands-on manipulation like an OT or a PT assessment, probably can't be recreated virtually, even if there is an adult like a parent there to work with the child. So assessors need to use their professional judgment to determine if an assessment can be recreated virtually. If you have to have a triennial that has comprehensive evaluations that are due, you can ask that some component parts of those assessments be completed, like a parent interview. And then when schools are reopened, the pieces that need to be completed with the student, those can be completed then. All right, we are moving through this. Our next section, I'm going to talk about some strategies you can use if you request or are invited to attend a virtual IEP meeting. I'm sure some of you have already attended a virtual IEP meeting, and so some of this may just be review. But virtual IEP meetings can be requested in the same way that you would request any other IEP in writing. The district still has 30 days to respond to your request because that 30-day timeline is a federal timeline. You can send your request to your child's school's special education coordinator or teacher or principal or case manager or district's director of special education. The Alliance for Children's Rights created a really helpful sample letter that's translated into in both Spanish and English, and you can use that to request a virtual IEP. The link is included on this slide, and I'll make sure it's included when I send those slides out. Since we are nearing the end of the school year, if you have an IEP that you want to hold, you should request it as soon as possible. It's still very likely that virtual IEPs will be held into next year. We still don't have concrete guidance from the state on when and how schools will reopen, so this information may still apply. But at our virtual meeting, there are many things that you can request based on your child's needs. You can request technological devices like a tablet or a laptop and sufficient internet connectivity so that they can access remote learning opportunities if you don't have those things in your home already. You can request assistive technology to help your student access services and instructions. Examples of this could be a text-to-speech device for a student with a visual impairment or reading delay. You can ask for sensory tools for a child with a sensory processing delay, or a durable case and cover for a child whose disability makes them more likely to drop or damage a piece of technology that's loaned. You can also request certain service delivery models. So you can ask that services be delivered in a large group or a small group with resource support or one-on-one academic support. Many services like speech and OT and mental health services, these can all be implemented appropriately through virtual technology. We'll discuss specific strategies related to those services later in the presentation. If any of you have attended a virtual IEP, I'm sure you can attest to this. Virtual IEP meetings are long and they are exhausting. You will not have the benefit in a virtual IEP meeting of in-person body language. So you can't really make or take cues based on that like you would if you were in an in-person meeting. And so because of that, you're going to have to be a lot more assertive than you typically would be if you have questions or concerns, since it's going to be more difficult for people to recognize your confusion. You're going to want to take notes and provide notice to record the meeting just in case you need to record it later. A strategy that I've used that's worked before for me has been requesting that the district provide a 5 to 10 minute break every hour or two to combat fatigue. And that helps that you can go and get water or get a snack and just recenter your mind. It's very important that if you attend an IEP for distance learning, you make clear that any consent you provide to a distance learning plan doesn't mean that you're waiving your rights to seek any compensatory services that are owed to your student after all of this is over. So just make sure that if you're signing something that language is in there. All right, a few more strategies. There are a few more issues that I've identified that you might want to consider before you attend a virtual IEP. Your child's attention span and ability to focus. You've been home with your kids for over 2 months now, so you can provide a lot more guidance and examples in an IEP meeting as to how your child is sort of taking to distance learning. You might want to think about your work schedule and your responsibilities for other children or family members, because that would affect your ability potentially or your availability to support your child with their schoolwork and services implementation. You might want to think about whether or not you can provide a quiet environment, or if you need any additional support or training or materials in order to effectively implement a distance learning plan. And then you might also want to think about, now that you've been doing this for a while, how frequently you would want to communicate with a teacher or provider to make distance learning a little bit less of a burden on you. It's a good idea to come prepared with notes on these issues. It can be helpful even to share your concerns with the district before the meeting so they have time to prepare solutions. This tends to cut down on the time needed to discuss these concerns in an IEP. All right, before we get into advocacy strategies for specific services, let's talk about comp services and how to document regression. I know this is a big concern for a lot of you. Documenting regression is very important. The Department of Education has said that once schools resume, the district must review how the closure impacted special education service delivery and then convene a meeting to see if compensatory services are needed for certain individual students. The way that the department has indicated that they're going to look into compensatory service needs is through the lens of regression. How did a student's progress or lack of progress during closures get them off track from the progress that they were projected to make? That, I think, means that compensatory services may be awarded based on the degree to which a student regressed, rather than necessarily how many service hours are owed. I can't be sure of this, but given the budget shortage we're about to enter, compensatory services may be difficult to get. Right now, nothing is guaranteed. Federal and state guidance say that children may be eligible for comp services, but neither government agency specified how the amount of of services needed will be determined, or the process that they're going to use to determine the amount of services that are owed. But in any event, documenting any lost skills or missed services will help you advocate for compensatory services once schools reopen and we have a better sense of what services or what comp services are available and how to access them. You can and probably should document any issues that you notice with students' academic abilities. So that means their reading level, their ability to, calculate their math, their problem-solving abilities, writing skills, etc. You also are going to want to pay attention to their coping skills, how they're doing emotionally, how's their mental health, what is their routine, what's their activities of their daily living, how are they managing their time, are you seeing new areas of weakness come up? And you can do this by keeping track of what subjects were assigned each week, how work was provided. Was it given to you through printed worksheets or online videos or recordings or phone calls or live virtual classroom or some other method? You can also keep track of what work your child was able to complete and what they weren't able to complete and why. You should look at, how much time your student is spending on certain assignments, what IEP services and accommodations were provided, whether you were contacted by any service providers or district staff or teachers, and any social, emotional, or behavioral challenges that were observed during the week. There are a number of ways that you can keep track of this. You can use a notebook or a chart. You can keep track of emails, but I think my personal favorite is to take pictures and videos. Pictures and videos can be really helpful ways to document regression because then they become visual aids when you want to schedule IEP meetings when schools open. And sometimes, when used in conjunction with data that you may be gathering otherwise, a video of your child struggling on a math assignment that they were able to complete before closures can be really helpful. All right. In an IEP meeting, it can be helpful to come up with some specific requests based on the unique services your child's getting. So let's talk about those. Just some general advocacy tips. When you are addressing service needs in an IEP during closures, there are several things that you can do to prepare and to advocate for your child at the meeting. Firstly, you're going to want to identify the services that your student has in their IEP that can still be provided during closures. For example, like I said, many services, including speech and occupational therapy and counseling and mental health services, those can be provided virtually. And so you're going to want to ask for the full amount of those services that the child received prior to closures, and then address whether the frequency or duration of those services needs to be modified to accommodate for virtual teacher models or your child's attention needs. Not all kids are capable of sitting in front of a computer screen to receive a service, that they would be sitting in front of a service provider who's interacting with them in real time. Another thing you're going to want to think about is, what is the setting that's going to work best for you to have your child receive this service? Some services work well for large group or small group, and some services need to be delivered individually. But keep in mind that the way that your child receives services may need to be modified to allow a service provider to be able to meet with all of the students on their caseload appropriately, since they're having to accommodate all students and there's just a lot of urgent needs. You should ask, and I recommend this for every single service, you should ask about building in some kind of process or protocol for consultation time with the teacher or service provider, so that you have a way to quickly access them if you have questions about assignments or services while they're receiving instruction remotely. And like I said before, if a service can't be provided at all, you can always request that that service be provided by a non-public agency. All right, let's talk about speech for a minute. The American Speech Language Hearing Association, I always mess that up, American Speech Language Hearing Association, I think it's ASHA, they've stated that the use of telehealth must be equivalent to the quality of services that a student receives in person. And so what that means is that the service has to take into account the child's specific needs during distance learning. So the child's ability to maintain attention, to sit still, to have a high level of cognitive functioning to be able to understand how the new way that services are being delivered. And then they also have to have hearing and visual abilities. It's really difficult. It's more challenging for students who are deaf or blind or hard of hearing to access services that are delivered over a computer. The child's environment is also really important when you're considering how a telehealth service is going to happen. You need to think that services have to be provided in a quiet room. There has to be good lighting. There has to be minimal distractions. You have to have technology that allows for the service to be delivered with optimal video and audio quality. And if you have any issues providing this type of environment, this is something that you're going to want to bring up at the meeting so that you can problem solve around it. Again, you should ask for parent consultation with speech so that you can get feedback to discuss concerns about how your child's progressing or how telehealth is going. All right, with OT, it's going to be pretty much those same considerations. The American Occupational Therapy Association has stated that OT services during COVID-19 can include online and virtual instruction. That can be instructional calls and activities, services provided in another location, or possibly even services provided in a student's home. I don't believe any districts in the AV are taking advantage of this option that's available to them to provide services in the home, but it is something that you can request. Let's see. With OT, there were some concerns early on as to how OT could be provided effectively over remote technology, since so much of OT is very much about manipulating a student's hand or body or working with their movement to establish where they are with balance. But instructors should attempt to use remote technology and video communication as much as possible to implement the same sort of activities that they would normally be doing in person. Although some of those supporting activities may require an parent to be available to help facilitate those activities. An OT toolkit or sensory bin can also be really essential for making OT successful. Things that you include like a pencil grip or a finger spacer or those handwriting books that have the appropriately spaced lines in them, or silly putty or chalkboard. There's just therapy bands. There's a number of different sensory tools that you can use and try. And you can consider requesting the tools that are already included in your child's IEP, or if you feel that others are necessary, talk to your OT about it and see if they can be sent from the district or purchased out of pocket and then reimbursed. You can also find countless OT activities through a Google search. So asking for those OT consult hours during closures can help you get feedback on activities that you find and then support as you're trying to implement them in the home. All right, for behavioral needs and services. This I'm sure is an issue that a lot of parents are dealing with because it's hard having a student in your home all day that hasn't typically been there, and the student's not used to being there. So you may find that a student's behaviors are more severe, or you're maybe are noticing regression in areas that they showed progress in before. So there are a lot of reasons to request that additional support from a BCBA or from a non-public agency if you're finding that those behaviors are creating a safety risk for you and your student in your home, or they're interfering with the student's ability to access the curriculum. At the very least, you should request for consultation and tools to be provided from a school psychologist. For example, a weekly parent consultation could be used to share behavior techniques that the school found to be successful with the child, or to revise, reward systems, or discuss how behavior needs are being documented. All right, SAI, Specialized Academic Instruction. This may be the hardest service to meaningfully provide from a distance. If your child receives SAI or RSP, you should consider asking for small group or one-on-one time with the teacher on a weekly basis, or even more frequently than that if you believe they need it. Have the child attend, a general education learning session, but then give them the opportunity to go to a small group or a one-on-one breakout session after. Or, weekly daily consults with the teacher to adapt or modify work as necessary. All right. Last but not least, we are going to look at guidance that's available on how students should be graded during closures, and considerations for graduating seniors if you have any students that are on graduation track and are this age. So the decision of whether or not to require graded work from students is a local one. Each district or system can make their own policy around this. There's nothing in the education code that governs whether a class will be offered as credit or no credit, pass fail, or a modified A through D system. Given the circumstances of COVID-19, some districts are considering a variety of options. If you have concerns with grading, bring them up with your teacher as soon as possible. There may be accommodations or modifications to work or deadlines that can be made to help. If a high school student is seeing that their classes are being switched to alternative grading skills, and they're concerned with how this is going to impact college admissions, the UC system, the Cal State system, the California Community College system, and the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities have all stated that they're willing to accept credit or no credit grades in lieu of letter grades for all courses, including those A through G courses that transfer to UCs. Those courses that they're accepting this flexibility on would be winter, spring, and summer of 2020 so far. But I'm assuming if we extend distance learning into the fall, that that flexibility will be extended as well. If you have a student who cannot complete work due to some serious illness like COVID-19, schools and teachers have to establish a policy for how to work with families on work completion or credit recovery as well. So that is the end of my presentation. I left us about 15 minutes for questions if we want to go ahead and start recording. And I can start with the questions that were in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.